Hey everyone, welcome to the OrtoTech Garage. My name is Keith. Today we're going to be looking at some automotive air conditioning system service. I really wanted to be able to give you guys a little bit of a behind the scenes sneak peek at what it looks like when you bring your vehicle in for an air conditioning problem, some of the process that I go through when I'm evaluating an air conditioning system. And I thought it would be fun if I gave you just a little bit of insight on what it looks like to evacuate, recover, and recharge an air conditioning system. I know these are things that you rarely get to see if you don't have the proper equipment, and I thought this would be really cool for you guys to check this out with me. Let's get in the garage and get after it. Here I am in the garage. I've got this car set up so that we can do the full air conditioning performance test on it. I want to show you some of the things that I'm looking for on the interior. Obviously, the first step to this is just getting the air conditioning working and seeing what the temperature is. So the first thing I'll do is set all these controls down to maximum low. I'm going to put my thermometer in the duct here, and I want to see a temperature somewhere at least in the low 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this can vary depending on ambient temperature, the outside temperature. Generally speaking, there's only going to be so much of a delta or difference between the outside temperature and inside temperature. But most cars will get down in the mid 40s at least, especially a car that has a good air conditioning system. Some can get down into the high 30s, mid 30s even. And we definitely want to make sure we're hitting at least 40, 42 degrees will be great. So that's step one, checking the temperature on it. I want to see what our client is talking about. If the air conditioning is not working well, I want to see what kind of temperatures we can get. I'm also looking at the duct temperatures at each duct. So I'm going to have a difference maybe from the passenger side to the driver's side all the way across. If I'm seeing one that's getting cold and another one that's warm, it's usually an indication to me that the refrigerant is low. It's also possible there's an actuator inside the dashboard that isn't moving. The first set of controls on here are going to be the temperature controls. We've got the blend door right here. This is the temperature up and down. I want to make sure when I go all the way up to hot that we're actually getting heat out of the car. So this is going to tell us a few things when we do that. We want to make sure that the heater core is actually producing heat. We want to make sure that the actuators are moving inside the dash and they're actually flipping over and moving the hot-cold blend door inside. So just putting it on briefly, checking for heat. As long as you're getting some heat out of it, both sides, that's a good indication everything's functioning there. Then I'll bring the temperature back down to our cold settings. You can take it out of auto mode. I want to make sure that every fan speed works on the car. This one has quite a few selections on it. It looks like 6 or 7 fan speeds before we get to high. Another thing I like to look at here are the modes. When I'm going through these controls, I want to make sure all these modes work. So you can see here, now I've got an indication on here showing it's going to the face and the feet at the same time. So I'll make sure I've got air in the vent. If I switch this to feet only, I want to make sure this air shuts off in the vents and it comes all the way down here on the floor. Now generally, if you're in maximum AC setting, you're going to want this air blowing directly in your face. Another button here I want to talk about is the recirculate and fresh air mode. So right now with this little arrow doing a loop, that's the recirculate mode. What that's doing is taking the air from inside the cabin, it's pushing it back through the evaporator, which is the piece that gets cold inside the dashboard, and then it's coming back out through the vents to you. And what that does is helps reduce the difference in temperature. So in other words, if it was 110 degrees outside and you're trying to cool off 110 degree air, we talked about a little bit about the delta, which is the difference in temperatures. You've got a very high difference in temperature between 110 degrees and 40 degrees. Now, if we've got this recirculate button on, what that's going to do for us is pulling the cabin from the inside. The temperature inside the cabin might only be 90 degrees now. Now the delta between 90 degrees and 40 degrees is much less, which means we're going to get colder air out of the vents. And that's why we use this recirculate button. Especially when it's hot and you want maximum air conditioning performance. You want to make sure you're pulling that air from in the cabin and cooling it and then putting it back through again through the air conditioning over and over again. When you got 40 degree air blowing out the vents and it's going back through the system again, it's just going to continue to get colder until it gets to a point where it doesn't want to freeze up any. This is another good thing to know if you're unaware. If you're driving through the countryside and you're going through the cow pasture and it's starting to smell a little stinky, make sure you're not on fresh air mode. The best thing you can do is flip that over. AC button is another thing I like to check. You should definitely want to turn it on and off. If this AC button doesn't light up, if you don't hear or feel anything different when you turn this on and off, that might be an indication that something's going wrong with the electronics, or maybe something even with the compressor possibly. The next function, you might want to look at your dual controls here. We want to see if we can get a different temperature out of the passenger side that we're getting out of the driver's side. Just make sure that in the dual mode, it does actually separate the two sides so that the passenger and the driver are having their own settings. So I'm checking the duct temperature on this particular car. It's not getting anywhere near where we want it to be. It's only coming out about 65 degrees or so. And we really want to see this down in the low 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So we'll recover what's in the system. We'll see. My sensors are telling me the system is just low. Everything else seems to be functioning to this point. And we'll go ahead and recover the refrigerant and measure how much we take out of there. All right, so I'm in here on the glove box, and I wanted to make mention that it's really important when we're performing an air conditioning service. We want to check the cabin air filter as well. It's possible it could have a restriction in there. I've been looking at these things for a lot of years. You never know what you're going to find in there. It could be loaded with just about anything. Like, even this one here, you're going to notice what I see on here. This is ridiculous. The like and subscribe button. And don't forget to honk that horn to get notifications. All right, so we're here. We're getting ready to connect this machine to the car. And I wanted to just quickly explain to you the difference between the two fittings on there. The red fitting is the high side fitting. The blue fitting is the low pressure fitting. Some cars will have a little identification like this one. This one here says L and this one says H on it. That's not the only way you can identify the correct fittings for each side. If I take these off here, you're going to see that the low side fitting is quite a bit smaller than the high side fitting. So the diameter of this is much larger than this one. They won't fit on there backwards properly. If I show you the connection side, you can see the low side fitting is obviously much smaller. There's no way I can put these on backwards. So that's the best way to tell. Sometimes these fittings are not this obvious. They're not in an easy spot to get to. This car happens to be very nice. Everything's right, easily accessible. We'll install our coupler on here, and then we'll tighten this down to depress the valve, the Schrader valve inside the fitting. All right, so both fittings are connected and locked down, and now we're ready to service this vehicle. Just wanted to talk to you for a second about some of the things that I'd be looking for under the hood. I want to turn the car on, get it running. I want to check the air conditioning condenser fan motor. I want to make sure it operates at full speed. If it's a dual speed fan, if it's got dual fans, we'll be looking at all those things. I want to check the air conditioning compressor operation. If it's a magnetic clutch type compressor, I want to see the clutch engage on and off. I want to inspect the clutch itself and look for any signs of discoloration, any possible damage. I'm also looking under the hood at all the hoses and things to see if there's any signs of oil stains on the hoses. That's usually a good indication that you've got a refrigerant leak. I'm also going to be looking at the general system altogether, all the piping and everything. I'm looking for any kinked metal lines, just anything out of the ordinary. This is all just part of the inspection. I do have to let you know this vehicle is a hybrid. It does not have an air conditioning compressor belt. It has an electric compressor. It operates just a little bit differently than the standard AC systems, but the rest of it functions pretty much the same. Just the compressor is controlled by the computer and no belt drive on it. It's all operated through an electric motor. I also want to tell you that this system, the hybrids with electric AC compressors on them, require a special oil, the ND11 oil. Usually there's a couple of different variants, but it's a special oil. It's kind of reduced. It's designed to reduce conductivity within the air conditioning system. The hybrids generally require a separate AC machine to be used with them. This way you're not cross-contaminating the system, so I just wanted to kind of point those things out before we get into this. But otherwise, everything else is going to be pretty much the same. Whatever car you're driving is going to have a similar procedure to this. Another thing I wanted to mention, once we get this car running, I'll be looking at some pressures on here just to determine if anything looks abnormal. But I'm also looking at the pressures, the static pressures of this particular system, just with the hoses connected. We want to open these valves up, and I just kind of want to see what type of pressure is in the system without it operating. This sometimes can be an indication that, if the pressures don't look where they should be, I'll discuss that in a second, that this system is low or empty or any of those things. Right now, my static pressures are sitting here at about 70 to 75 pounds And generally speaking, this is kind of a very loose rule, but you want to see your static pressure somewhere around the ambient temperature. So here in the garage, it's a warm day today. We got evaporative coolers running, but it's probably 90 degrees in here. It's pretty warm. So I can see the static pressures are just a hair lower than I might expect to see. That could be an indication the refrigerant is low, and would also kind of align with the fact that we're not getting the proper duct temperatures out of this particular car. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to close these valves, and I want to fire this car up, and I want to get the air conditioning running so I can check and see what type of pressures the system is creating on its own. And we want to see if everything looks kind of somewhat in the normal range, or if there's something that's very obvious to us that we've got a problem. Let's do that now. I can see here my high side pressure is just under 150 psi. My low side is right around 30 psi. These pressures are just a tad low compared to what they should be. I'm still assuming at this point that the refrigerant level is just low on this car based on everything we've checked so far. I've taken a look at the AC condenser fan. It's operating normally. Everything else seems to be functioning. I don't see any obvious signs of leaks. So the next step for us is we're going to recover the refrigerant that's in this car, and we want to actually weigh this refrigerant as we take it out and determine how much refrigerant is in the system by weight. I've got this machine set up to recover the refrigerant now. It's been removing the refrigerant and weighing it as it comes out of the system. This is important because we want to know exactly how much refrigerant was in there. This refrigerant is not something we can just measure with a cup. It's in gas form most of the time. So we're weighing it as it comes out, and we'll match that up to the spec on the car and see how much we were low, and that'll tell us exactly where our problem was at. If it's low, that just usually means that it's got a leak somewhere. That'll need to be identified. It's been a few minutes since I started the recovery process. Now that all the refrigerant has been removed from the vehicle, I can see here that this vehicle had about 6/10 of a pound of refrigerant in there. This refrigerant in this vehicle is R134A. There is a newer version of refrigerant out there. This particular vehicle is old enough it doesn't take that yet. The spec on this vehicle is 1.14 pounds maximum charge. Minimum charge is just about a pound or so. So we're definitely a bit low on this system. We're going to need to do the next step on that, and that's going to be to evacuate the system. So recovery is just removing the refrigerant, and then the evacuation process is removing the air from the system and the moisture from the system. When we pull this system into a vacuum, it'll actually boil any water that was in there, removing all of it. And we also want to make sure that there is a giant void in this system. We don't want any air pockets. So this is why we perform this vacuum process on there. All right, it's been quite a while here. We've let this machine do its job evacuating the AC system. You generally want to let this happen for about 30 minutes or so. This is, if you want to get a complete evacuation on it. We also want to let this system sit for a while. I've closed the valves on this, and we just want to make sure it holds a vacuum. Now, it's been sitting steady here for a couple minutes as well. I usually give it about 5 minutes or so to sit, and I want to make sure that my vacuum is holding. Now, in a perfect world, we want to see 30 inches of vacuum on this system. We are at a higher altitude here in the desert Southwest, probably about 2,500 feet above sea level. We're never going to get a perfect vacuum out of here. But the main thing to note is that when we pull a vacuum on the system, we want to see it reach our maximum vacuum. Here is going to be probably about 27 inches of vacuum, and then we want it to stay there after we recover it. If it does not hold a vacuum for a few minutes at least, that means you've got a large leak in the system. We've got to identify that right away. The system is not going to be okay to charge. All that refrigerant is just going to come out quickly. We're going to lose that to the atmosphere. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure we're protecting the environment here. That's why we use these recovery machines. We're ready to recharge this system with 1.14 pounds of R134A refrigerant. So we're setting up the charge in this machine. And I just wanted to give you a quick peek here and show you how precise these machines are. I mean, it literally goes all the way down to a hundredth of a pound. And we're going to make sure our valves are open here, and we're ready to charge. Here we go. All right, so here we are. We've successfully charged the vehicle back up with the proper amount of refrigerant, a little over 1.1 pounds worth. And we've got the system running, and we're checking the pressures on it right now. They look quite a bit better. I see I've got my high side pressure is a little over 30. I'm sorry, my low side pressure is a little over 30, and my high side pressure is approaching 200 here with the compressor running on its own. We've also gone inside and we've checked the duct temperature. We're getting all the way down to about 40 degrees, 41, 42 degrees in that range. So the system is definitely getting colder now. We've dropped over 20 degrees in temperature thanks to having a full charge on the system. So that pretty much concludes this portion of the demonstration for you of what it takes to get your system charged up. But I do want to let you know there's another step that we're going to have to go through here off camera. We want to go ahead and leak test the system, and we want to determine if there's anything leaking on it that we can address right now before we let this car go down the road. If your system is low, it's because you've leaked out somewhere or somebody didn't charge it properly at some other point. And that's fairly rare unless you were at a body shop or something and they didn't get a proper charge on it. We definitely want to make sure we're identifying where the leak is. We want to make a repair to it, whatever that might be. If we can identify it, for some reason, if we can't identify it, then we may have to just let them take it. You know, they may come back. It might last a year. It might last 6 months. It might last, you know, a few weeks. It's really just hard to tell. Good indication that this system is sealed fairly tightly, as it did have quite a bit of refrigerant in it when it came in. It wasn't completely empty. All right, we finished charging up that car, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of points now that we're here back in the studio. I wanted to let you know that that car still needs some inspection on it. It still needs a little bit of diagnostic work to identify what that leak is. And there are some special tools for that. There are special procedures depending on the manufacturer. That's a video for another day. I didn't want to bog this one down, overload it with a whole separate process on there. But if that's something you guys are really interested in learning, you want to see what automotive refrigerant leak detection looks like, how do we identify the leak and how do we repair it, you know, we can certainly do another video on that down the road. Just leave us some notes down in the comments. We always want to hear from you, and we enjoy that kind of feedback. I really appreciate you sticking with us, watching these videos. We've got another great one here we're posting up for you. Hope you're really loving our content, and we'll see you in the next video.